All right, to our next panel, how open data is shaping the future of personal finance. And again, we have a panel of 4 with Sinead Lynch from Gadens, wrangling them. I have to say, well done to the Wee Money guys. I was almost going to wear my Wee Money socks this morning. I went with Australian pork ones instead. Fashion's in the field. You guys have got it with the silk Wee Money jackets. So I'm going to get Dan Yavevsky up first to the catwalk. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the handsome, dashing founder and CEO of Wee Money. Just go backwards and forwards, do a twirl. Fantastic jacket. Of course, the financial wellness platform is aimed at helping Gen Z and millennials achieve their money goals and live their best financial lives. Then Adam Goulden, who is the Regional Sales Manager at MoneyThor, a leading provider of personalised digital banking. Yes. With MoneyThor, I'm thinking, is there a Money Ragnarok as well? And we're going through the whole Norse mythology. Fantastic. Yep. I'm kind of the money Loki in all of this, I have to say. Simone Jennett is the GM of Experian Digital and Head of Strategy ANZ at Experian Australia. Simone, please come up. She's responsible for leading Experian digital data businesses across ANZ, providing transaction enrichment and categorisation services predominantly to the financial services sector. And finally, Jason, where are you? Is Jason here? There he is on this side, coming in. Entrance stage left is Jason Leong, the CEO and co-founder of Pocketsmith. Based in New Zealand, the software is used by consumers in over 190 countries, a truly global fintech. The customers are money adventurers and they're proud to make beautiful tools to help them track their money their way. As I said, Sinead, where are you? There she is. Sinead, please put your hands together. Sinead is a leading commercial technology and data regulatory lawyer with over 15 years of international experience advising global clients on their technology, digital and data-driven transactions. A dinner party with you and Scott, I reckon, would be a lot of fun. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together as we talk open data shaping the future of personal finance.
Thank you for that. And a dinner with Scott, I think I would do all the jokes. I think the Irish in me would make that happen. Welcome, everyone. I was going to start by doing some introductions, but it looks like that has been done. So it's fantastic to see the great expert panels that we have for this session. We're going to be talking about how open data is shaping the future of personal finance. And I guess when we look at the rising cost of living crisis and being able to manage personal finances, we know is critical for consumers. We know it's critical for us, particularly in relation to financial decision making, whether that's budgeting, whether that's payments, credit lending decisions or investment decisions. How we manage our finances better is going to be more beneficial for all consumers. And I guess delving into where open data fits into all of this and the CDR more broadly, engagement in the ecosystem is obviously going to bring lots of positive use cases. And taking words from the Minister this morning, he wants to hear about use cases, use cases, use cases. I'm hopeful that we will have a very positive story to tell in that regard. So if I jump really into where we're seeing the world of personal finance currently in terms of what's happening globally, radical transformation, unprecedented pace, and obviously that's been driven by digitization. We've seen obviously the impact of COVID, rollout of new products and services, competitive markets, interest in cryptocurrency, the list goes on. Would you agree, and I'm going to give this to each one of you individually, but would you agree that we're seeing this rapid pace of change here in Australia in relation to personal finance products and services, and where do you see open data driving this change? Jason, if I could start with you. Thanks and welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Sinead. Yes, absolutely yes. Australia is our fastest growing market, and it's been amazing to see, very encouraging to see Australians flock to a bunch of online tools and using open data to really explore their finances and take an active interest in their money. So absolutely it is affecting Australia One, in fact, really cool thing we're seeing is an influx of people managing things like the Barefoot Investor on PocketSmith. And we're not designed for it, but they're using our tools to build a system in which it can bring in their buckets and their accounts, and then they're using graphs to see the flows of money, and then adding to it charts. And the CDR data gives them an opportunity to track things in near real time. And so what we're learning from this is that the tools are breathing new life into tried and true, well-loved older concepts like the Barefoot Investor, alongside the newer things that are coming on board as well. So that's very encouraging.
Fantastic. Simone, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think regardless of sort of CDR and where CDR is at today, there's been huge amounts of innovation within financial services across the last, 5 or 6 years, well before COVID, and probably accelerated a bit with COVID as well. We know with our clients that customer experience is, one of their top 5 priorities. So we hear that, it's a common thread that we hear all the time, and that's experience. In our world, it's mainly banks, but we hear about everyday banking, we hear about lending, we hear about personal financial management, and you touched on the current economic environment, big focus on how they can help their customers to better manage through potential hardship situations, and really being able to self-serve through that as well for multiple reasons. So there's a lot of investment from a customer experience perspective. We also know that year over year, budgets in investment into that customer experience area, all those customer experience areas have increased by 50% over the last 12 months as well, which is, really shows, I suppose, where some of the prioritisation is. But I think if you flip that then to the consumer, we're all really well aware that, and I was listening to the last panel, consumers are really worried about their data. They probably didn't think about it as much before. We're now starting to see consumers very concerned about who they're sharing their data with. They know they're sharing data, they know it's being used, they're not always 100% sure about where it's being used and how, and potentially how it's being stored as well. And I think that's now, when you take the innovation that we've got to date, and then you, on top of that, overlay CDR standards around consent and use and storage and all of those things, it should, as the Minister mentioned this morning, ideally it actually gives consumers a lot of confidence then around sharing their data. And hopefully over time what that means too is that consumers are actually much better educated. At the end of the day, CDR is around increased competition, innovation, and to put more choice in the hands of the consumer. And, that's what it should end up doing, I think, if we're building on current innovation and then leveraging that.
Fantastic. Adam, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if we compare the Australian market at Moneythor with other markets globally, population-wise, and I guess the return on our investment, we're definitely leading in Australia and New Zealand. I think a couple of key elements are, we hear about use cases from the Minister this morning. There's 2 fintechs that I'm on stage with right now, and close to 800 others that are really driving use cases. And so for us, we see them as then influencing the big banks who we work with, and smaller tier 2 banks as well, to really up their game. So whilst we've got innovative fintechs like the ones in the room and on stage with me, who are forging forward with these use cases and adding value to consumers and their users, then that'll drive the laggards who will follow on afterwards.
The contentious point, but we won't raise that. We might come back to that one, Adam. And Dan, what are your thoughts in terms of how Australia is faring in this race, and what WeMoney are seeing from a personalised product perspective?
Yeah, totally. Look, we're absolutely believers in open finance and open banking. We think it is the future. And I want to illustrate a point actually from a WeMoney customer. Just for a bit of context, WeMoney is now one of the leaders in the personal financial management category, or the financial wellness space. We've just ticked over 500,000 downloads, and what we're seeing, and what we saw about 3 years ago, is this massive gap to address the needs of 18 to 35-year-olds and people that traditionally didn't get help and support for managing their money and their finances. And I wanted to share a story of Ben, who was an engineer, 32 years of age, who became a single father of 2 kids. And his journey with money was the accumulation of credit card debt, personal debt, to go through personal circumstances. And then he came onto the WeMoney platform, connected his accounts via the CDR platform, uncovered that he was paying 25% on average on consumer loan products. And then within 24 hours, he ended up selecting a provider, switching his details over, and saving over $300 each and every single month. Ben was so pleased about his experience, he ended up sharing a video with us that almost kind of brought us to tears, because in his personal story, he got to buy his kids Christmas presents last year. And they're some of the real personal stories and anecdotes from many young people today that are living with these challenges. So we think open finance is the accelerant to help Ben, and Ben isn't alone in that journey that's shared amongst millions of young Australians that navigate these very critical money issues. So yeah, that's our point of view.
Dan, that's just admirable. And I think in terms of, the cost of living crisis that we talked about earlier and hardship issues, actually seeing those use cases come to life and having that real life examples and more real life examples is exactly what will try and accelerate the positive journey that open banking is on and open data. Can I just talk a little bit too, because when we talk about open data, we're not just talking obviously about banking data, we are talking about that wider ecosystem in the context of energy and telco and the non-bank lending sector, as we see CDR being rolled out to last week in terms of the consultation. And we know that enterprises are collecting more and more data, and we have the data lake issue in relation to data lakes of information and how you can try and drive data analytics and better insights-driven data analytics from the amount of data being collected. I've actually read recently that the data analytics markets, particularly for the FS sector, it's projected to be worth about $57 billion over the next 5 years, and that's some significant spend. And finance enterprises in particular are increasing their investment by about 30%. When we look at that in terms of data analytics, insights-driven data analytics, intelligent analytics, and we apply that to the world of personal finance and personal products, it can't really be a one-size-fits-all approach, can it, Jason? Because I look at my finances are pretty complex. I'd like to say they mightn't be as complex as Scott's, but they are certainly complex. And I think, if you're looking at analytics and insights-driven, what are your thoughts on personalization of products and services and where hyper-personalization is going?
That's a great question, Sinead. Oh gosh, where do we begin with this? So our finances are getting more complex, particularly when we transition from managing personal finances to household finances. And that's typically what happens when you have a family. You're not just managing a single income. We're starting to look at multiple sources of income, multiple expenditures, multiple goals and budgets to track assets, liabilities, and so on and so forth. Typically, this falls down to on the shoulders of one person in the household, and we call that person the home CFO. I just want to ask the team here, how many of you are the home CFO for your household? It's cool. We're out there. And if your hand wasn't up, then it's likely that your partner is the home CFO. And it's there's no judgment there because it's a fair division of labor in a household. Households are busy, and it tends to fall onto one person to be doing a lot of the financial administration for the family. Now, the challenges here is in that it can be a lonely job as a home CFO because you've got to make these decisions, track data, and then most importantly, communicate that back to your family. And that's where that data piece comes in. It's complex, there's a lot in there, and we know that the lack of communication in amongst family members or even partners is a major source of household stress, financial stress, and strife. And this is something that we think the financial services industry has a real opportunity to do with the data, which is to actually give specific lenses on data to help people get the best insights from it. And so we've got a case study here. So one of our favorite users is Ruth, and she is a financial podcaster and a blogger, and she's the home CFO. And so she believes, obviously, in good communication with the family about the family finances. They retired early, and so they're budgeting quite carefully as well. Now, she's got the Bloomberg dashboard on PocketSmith with everything, balances and accounts, budgets, and all that sort of stuff. But her husband is a designer, And so he's overwhelmed by an immense amount of data and insights. He's a visual person. And so their dashboard is customized to use graphs, colors, tags, labels, things that actually make sense and that can be a middle ground for conversation between the two of them. And then we'll look at her daughter, and the scope tightens even more. She's made a dashboard specifically with budgets that highlight when she's going to be next, when she's next going to be able to buy those Legos that she's saving up for. Just very specific things. So if we zoom it right back out, what we're looking at here is a real opportunity to not take data as wholesale, but to really think about how consumers need to use this data and how they perceive their finances, what is their mental map of their money, and then using our capabilities with open data in order to refine that experience for them. So our experience with our users, we're seeing them be curious about their money, they're experimenting with it, they're having fun and getting these insights they wouldn't otherwise have gotten. And then to our mind, that really is one of the best representations of open data at work.
And Pocket Smith are doing, they're making strides in this space, particularly in hyper-personalization.
Yeah.
And we talked actually just before this session in terms of that personalization and how it has to be very, very targeted, very focused, but also the reliance on the quality of the data that underpins those decisions being made, the fidelity of the data. Simone, if I could go to you, when we look at that, what are some of the ways, because we all know that fidelity of data, particularly in this space, is one of the biggest challenges. What are the ways that we can mitigate this risk? What is happening from an Experian perspective? What are you guys doing, and what are you seeing? How we can solve this challenge from a positive perspective?
Yeah, I think I'd say that for us at Experian Digital, the data is core to what we do. So the personalisation experts are my peers here on the panel, not necessarily us. We're a B2B organisation. In saying that though, if you go back sort of 5 or 6 years ago, before that in your everyday banking app, you probably had loads of transactions that you were unable to recognise, which is pretty much bread and butter today, right? In your banking apps, you can see that, you can easily recognise a transaction. And in a current world where people are so worried about scams and fraudulent transactions and things, that's actually really important from a customer experience perspective. So anything that you're building on top of data, you need to be really conscious about that data being consistently accurate and reliable and meaningful to the consumer. And the reason why I say consistent, and I really emphasise that, is because for all of us who work with data all the time in this room, it is constantly changing. And even in the CDR landscape with standards, there's still changes around the data quality that we have to work with day in and day out as well. So it's really important that you either have a data partner or yourselves, with the way you manage data, that you've got good, strong governance, good, strong processes in place to make sure that data is accurate, and it changes in real time. So you can't sort of leave and forget. You have to be constantly looking at that data. And then I think the other thing that we're very conscious of in our organisation, we work with clients who have multiple touch points with their customers across a journey from end-to-end banking. For example, everyday banking all the way through to lending in their personal financial management apps, for example. And if you are using different data lakes, which sometimes is happening at the moment, that's powering one use case and then a different data set or data lake powering another one, we will eventually end up in a world where consumers are marrying that data together and they start to see inconsistencies. As soon as they can't rely on that data anymore, then they lose trust. And we all know that, we're all consumers, so it's not rocket science. But you need to be able to rely on that data and trust that data. And I suppose I just want to emphasise that it's really important to stay on top of it. It needs constant work and management.
Yeah, it's a moving feast, right? It's evolving as information is collected. The more and more it needs to be verified, it needs to have those reviews carried out. Dan, would you have some thoughts maybe on that as well, just from a fidelity perspective, particularly in relation to your financial wellness product and service?
Yeah, 100%. So I think the power of open finance right now is that essentially you get way more data fields with open banking data, and we start getting very specific. So we get to the point that if you've got a fixed rate mortgage, we now know when that fixed rate mortgage is set to expire. And you can then personalise an opportunity that is just in time for a particular user that's going through something in their life at the moment where they have a need to pay attention to their finances. Why is that important? Well, people stay with their current bank longer than a typical Australian marriage. So your relationship with your main primary bank is 17 years, but a typical Australian marriage only lasts 12. And so what we think Open Finance will actually unlock is this opportunity for having really fine-grained personalisation opportunities at the exact right moment when a job to be done or a need for a customer is in play. And we think that's the incredible future of Open Finance. I don't think we're there yet in terms of that data quality piece. I think there's still a lot to go. It's amazing that people on this panel today and everyone in this room, and again from the Minister's comments sort of this morning, that data piece needs to be resolved to a large degree so we can start really maximising these personalised experiences at scale. And that's the part of Open Finance that we're really excited about. But there's a little bit of work to go before we get there.
And if I may,
Adam,
probably ties into what you're going to ask next, Sinead, around the international perspective on that.
Absolutely. I was about to say we can't forget, because it's so important to just see what's happening internationally and how that's going to influence the local market here. What are your...
Yeah, so whether we work with a bank or a fintech globally, and we do have partners in all regions, the key aspect that Dan alluded to is if you're going to make a decision for personalisation for one of your users, it has to be contextual and it has to be relevant at the right time. If you can tick off those two things, then the engagement and the uptake, which is one of the things we're here today to talk about, from a CDR perspective, why is there no more uptake? Well, not more uptake, sorry. If you're sending contextual, relevant pieces of content from a personal finance perspective, from a rewards, loyalty perspective, from a cross-sell, here's the right product for you at the right time perspective, then you're going to have increased engagement. And so whether we work with a Standard Chartered or a DBS, a NAB, an ANZ, fintech like Booster in New Zealand, they're all doing that really well. They're using data to serve contextual recommendations and insights at the right time, which leads to greater uptake of their services and a better outcome for both the financial organisation and the consumer. So take away from, I guess, what we see globally, get the data quality right, and be contextual and relevant at the right time.
That's really helpful. And I'm going to go off script a little bit, because I just want to delve into that point that you raised in relation to use cases and what's happening internationally. What do we think is the low-hanging fruit if we look at some of those use cases here in Australia? I mean, are there the ethical use cases like, carbon footprint tracking that you talked about, and the loyalties? Where are those areas? Is it in financial wellness, as Dan has talked about, where we're going to see that real traction happening within the personal finance world?
Yeah, well, the successful implementations of our solution globally have been where it spans multiple different use cases. So it'll be a money management use case around spend tracking, savings, loyalty and rewards. I think they're the opportunities, and I think on the back of a couple of these fintechs doing really well in that space, that we'll see a lot of the banks try and follow and replicate, and I'm pretty confident that that'll happen soon. But then if there's further innovation, and the likes of a Greener or a Kogo who are doing using CDR data to track your carbon footprint and give you an idea of how to reduce that, I know that there's banks copying that at the moment in market. So yeah, I think the innovation will come from the fintechs, and they'll be the first movers in this space and look to be replicated by the larger organisations. But as long as they keep innovating and outpacing, then there'll definitely be success in that space as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. Any other thoughts from Simone, Jason, Adam on that? Or concurrently, vehemently agree, which is fine too.
I think we agree, and I think that's the thing, right? There are global markets that are actually, hitting maturity with the use of open data, and we can see that. Like it's very clear in other markets like the UK, US, slightly different model. It's not heavily regulated like here, but it's still opening up loads of opportunity, and so there's definitely lots of opportunity there.
And the only other piece I'll add, I don't think we're so far behind that we can talk about this as a future state thing anymore. Like we're not that far behind what's happening in the UK and other markets from an open banking or open data perspective. So yeah, enough of the future state, this is what's coming. Let's start talking about it now, because you can see that there are organisations doing it. So yeah, no more waiting around.
And that, I mean, literally that echoes the Minister's and the government's view on this as well in terms of transparency on what is happening now in this space, how is open data actually fueling and driving benefits within personal finance, but even more broader into other areas as well. So a call, I think, to everyone in the room as to, start publicizing, marketing the use cases and what is happening in the successful use cases, I guess, is probably a message. Can I just touch, it's a final question for panelists, because I see the 5-minute sign has been lifted. We all know that building user trust and consumer trust is obviously critical for the effective adoption and the successful adoption of any new kind of data-related product or service. And people are obviously hesitant to accept data-driven tools because of all the things we talked about in terms of data system security, dependability, unfamiliarity. What would you say to this? And I'm going to leave this question very open-ended so that you can, because there are lots of solutions and lots of thoughts and views on this, but I'm keen to get your views, Jason, and really more broadly on the panel to those questions and those issues of user adoption.
Well, thanks, Sinead. I think I'll echo a bit of what Simone and Dan were talking about with regard to user trust and the fidelity of data, that we need to work on some fundamentals here, and it's going to remain challenging while the banks are still the gatekeepers of that data. And we see real chances for improvement in 2 key areas. One is the technology piece, where we're not seeing the fidelity and reliability of CDR data on par with what customers are getting in their online banking tools. And secondly, there's an education piece where we think the banks could do better to support customers who do reach out to them asking about information or guidance for using third-party tools, only to be faced with someone who doesn't really know what open data is. And so that's a real massive own goal, I think, in terms of the face of getting open banking rolled out. And we're not going to name any particular bank, but I can cite in terms of a case study. In terms of a case study, we've got one from every bank, and it typically the correspondence follows that they'll try to link up to a bank and an error occurs, and so there's a phone number for them to call, and they call the bank, and the frontline staff tells them that open data isn't quite available to you, or we can't connect to this particular service, which is untrue. Yes, and so then they come back to us, and so the thing is, there are only that many opportunities to gain the trust of a consumer when they're first using tools to try to better their financial situation, and it's we are getting traction, but some of these opportunities are just causing the entire system to be mistrusted, and we can see why. But we're looking forward to really working alongside our fellow fintechs to really get that across the line.
Excellent. I'm reminded of, and I'm not naming any bank, but I am reminded of a recent major that did have a product or service, I think it was called Next Best Conversations, which was about lead generation and driving lead generation with individual consumers as well. So that feeds into some of those discussions around user adoption and proactive learning. Simone, did you have any thoughts on that, just as a final comment?
Look, I think when I look back 5 years ago with open banking, there was a lot about consumer education, and that was really important. Actually, what we've found, and through surveys that we've done, is that consumers will share their data when the use case is valuable, so when there's a good return on them sharing that information, and that's anything like a faster speed to a decision on a credit application, not having to fill in a form, whatever that is. But I think I would just add that I don't think that putting up really good, strong use cases is great, and we need the consumer engagement, but we as businesses obviously still have an ongoing obligation to make sure that the consent is right, that is secure, all of those aspects that CDR brings regardless.
Yeah, I'll try and be as succinct as possible and borrow a phrase from Demir, who was set up here previously. There's got to be a value exchange. So there has to be a clear value and reason why the consumer would share their data for them to take up on that offer. And then the customer experience, the digital experience has to be really clean as well.
So value beats trust?
I think so. We've seen that with screen scraping for a long period of time. People are happy to share their banking password if they were able to get value from it. So.
Yeah. Dan, thanks, Adam.
Yeah, so look, trust is the cornerstone of any financial services company. If you don't have that, you really don't have a business. So that is some of Jason's comments here today in terms of the elements of sort of mistrust and all those issues being sort of worked through. So we think that will happen. We think that we're in the stages right now where we're in the infancy of open finance in terms of initial adoption, but we'll hit a tipping point very, very quickly in terms of broader adoption, bigger institutions that are taking that. And I'm reminded of the hotel industry and the airline industry, when they started to democratise their own data. You look at what happened in that particular market segment, 50% of all airlines and hotels now get booked on other platforms. And so that's, I think, a message today for the current generation of sort of incumbent sort of institutions, is that not to look to see how we can maybe slow down what's happening in open banking adoption, but can you potentially look to actually embrace these kind of new sort of business models? Because the reality is that people on the stage and in the room today will start creating these solutions that will take finance to the edge with not only just the read-only state, but then also payment initiation. So I think that's something that we're really focused on, is developing those very specific use cases to enact customer benefits, which we think is actually being shared across the whole entire industry. So, yeah.
So the future is bright, and to use the airline analogy, it's not just when it takes off, but it has taken off effectively in terms of personal finance and products and services. I think I've been told to wrap it up.